Second, to come to the history of the gospel dispensation. It is true, in that time of the primitive persecutions under heathen emperors, this privilege of self-defense was not so much improved or contended for by Christians, who studied more to play the martyrs than to play the men, because in these circumstances the Lord was pleased to spirit for and call them unto and accept of their hands passive testimonies, while they were incorporate under a civil relation with the heathens, in subjection to governors who did not by open tyranny overturn their civil liberties, only did endeavor to eradicate religion, which at that time had never become their right by law, while they were scattered and out of capacity, and never could come to a separate, formed community by joint concurrence and correspondence to undertake a declared resistance, while religion was only a propagating through the nations, and the Lord providentially did preclude the least appearance that might be of propagating it by any formed force, being the gospel of peace, designed to save and not to destroy. Yet even then instances are not wanting of Christians resisting their enemies, and of rescuing their ministers, etc., as they are found on record. Firstly, how some inhabitants inhabiting Mariota with force rescued Dionysius of Alexandria out of the hands of such as were carrying him away about the year 255. Second, how about the year 310 the Arminians waged war against Maximus, who was come against them with an army because of their religion. Third, how about the year 342 the citizens of Athanasius, their minister, against Gregorius, the intruded curate, and Cyrenius, the emperor's captain, who came with great force to put him in. Fourth, how about the year 356? The people of Constantinople did in like manner stand to the defense of Paulus against Constantius, the emperor, and killed his captain Hermogenes, and afterwards in great multitudes they opposed the intrusion of the heretic Macedonius. Fifth, how about when a wicked edict was sent forth to pull down the churches of such as were for the clause of one substance? The Christians that maintained that testimony resisted the bands of soldiers that were procured at the emperor's command by Macedonius to force the Mantinians to embrace the Arian heresy. But the Christians at Mantium, kindled with an earnest zeal towards Christian religion, went against the soldiers with cheerful minds and valiant courage, and made a great slaughter of them. Sixth, how about the year 387? The people of Caesarea did defend Basil, their minister. Seventh, how, for fear of the people, the lieutenant of Emperor Valens durst not execute those 80 priests who had come to supplicate the emperor, and were commanded to be killed by him. Eighth, how the inhabitants of Mount Nitria espoused Cyril's quarrel, and assaulted the lieutenant, and forced his guards to flee. Ninth, how about the year 404, when the emperor had banished Chrysostom? The people flocked together, so that the emperor was necessitated to call him back again from his exile. 10th, how the people resisted also the transportation of Ambrose by the command of Valentinian the emperor, and chose rather to lose their lives than to suffer their pastor to be taken away by the soldiers. 11th, how the Christians, oppressed by Bartaeans, king of Persia, did flee to the Romans to seek their help, and Theodosius the emperor is much praised for the war which he commenced against Chosroes, king of Persia, upon this inducement, that the king sought to ruin and extirpate those Christians in his dominions that would not renounce the gospel. Number 3. But when religion was once embraced in embodied corporations and established by law, and became a people's common interest in liberty, in a capacity to defend it with their lives and other liberties, and when it was propagated through the nations, then the Lord did call for other, more active testimonies in the preservation and defense of it, of which we have many instances in histories. About the year 894, the Bohemian Christians resisted Drahomika, their queen, who thought to have destroyed them, and reintroduced paganism. About the year 1420, they maintained a long defensive war against the government and the Pope's legates, under the management of their brave captain, Ziska, which was further prosecuted after him by the remaining Thaborites. And again, in this century, in the year 1618, they maintained a defensive war against the Emperor Ferdinand II, electing and erecting a new king in opposition to him, Frederick Palatine of the Rhine, in which cause many received a crown of martyrdom, and this was also espoused by King James VI, who sent to aid his son-in-law against the emperor. Fourth, if we look to the histories of the Waldenses, these constant opposers of Antichrist, we will find many instances of their resistance. About the year 1194, very early, while Waldo, from whom they had their name, was alive, They began to defend themselves by arms after the bloody edict of Alphonsus, king of Aragon, an edict so like to many of ours emitted this day, as it would seem our enemies have taken the copy of it. So it were very seemly, for the people grieved with such edicts to imitate the copy of the Waldenses, their practice in opposition to them. In the year 1488, they resist by arms Albert de Capitanius, sent by Pope Innocent VIII in Pragola and Frassinari, and throughout Piedmont, where, for the most part, the offspring of the old Waldenses had their residence, where, very evidently, through many successions of ages, they showed themselves to be the true successors of their worthy progenitors, valiant for the truth. That's a famous instance of their resistance in opposing vigorously the Lord of Trinity in the same Piedmont, at which time they so solemnly asked their ministers whether or not it were lawful to defend themselves against his violence, who answered affirmatively. And accordingly they did it with wonderful success at that time and many times thereafter, especially in its note or in the memory of this present age, how in the year 1655 a vigorous defensive war was prosecuted against the Duke of Savoy by their captains Geneval, Jaihir, etc., which was espoused by many Protestant princes, and no further gone than the very last year. It is known how they resisted the arms of that tiger, and the French that helped him, and that their simplicity in trusting Popish promises was their ruin. Fifth, if we look over the histories of the Albigenses, we find many instances of their defensive resisting their oppressing superiors. About the year 1200 they defended themselves at Béziers and Carcassonne against the Pope's legate and his crossed soldiers, under the conduct first of the Earl of Béziers, and then of the Earl of Foix, and Earl of Remnant of Thoulouse, and were helped by the English, who then possessed Guinea bordering upon Thoulouse, which resistance continued several years. Afterwards, in the year 1226, they maintained a resistance against the King of France. Sixth, in Spain we find the people of Aragon contesting with Alphonsus III and associating themselves together against him, and they tell Pedro III, their king, that if he would not contain himself within the limits of the laws, they would pursue him by arms about the year 1283, as also other Spaniards who rose in arms several times against Pedro, the first king of Castile. Seventh, it was this which brought the cantons of Helvetia into this state of freedom, wherein they have continued many years. For about the year 1260 they levied war against their oppressing nobles, and in the year 1308 they joined in covenant to defend themselves against the house of Austria, and in the year 1315 they renewed it at Bruna, in which at length the rest of the cantons joined and formed themselves into a commonwealth. Eighth, if we take a glance of the Germans, we will find at the very commencement of the Reformation, as soon as they got the name of Protestants, they resisted the Emperor Charles V, the Duke of Saxon, the Landgrave of Hesse, and the city of Magdeburg, with advice of lawyers concluded, quote, that the laws of the empire permitted resistance of the emperor in some cases, that the times were then so dangerous that the very force of conscience did leave them to arms, and to make a league to defend themselves, though Caesar or any in his name should make war against them. For since he be attempted to root out religion and subvert our liberties, he giveth us cause enough to resist him with a good conscience. The matter standing as it doth, we may, say they, resist, unquote, as may be showed both by sacred and profane histories, and so they undertook and stated the war upon the account of religion and liberty. Ninth, if we but cast an eye over to the Hollanders, we will find how much they stand obliged to this practice of defensive arms, having thereby recovered both religion and liberty, and established themselves into a flourishing state. We find even in the time of de Alva's persecution, they began to defend Haarlem and Valenciennes in Hainault, and went on till under the conduct of William of Nassau, Prince of Orange, they declared the King of Spain to have fallen from the government of those countries, and so effectually shook off the yoke of Spanish tyranny. 10th, if we go to the French Huguenots, we will find many instances among them, and many brave heroes raised up to maintain the principle and prosecute the practice thereof of older and later date. The history of the civil wars of France is stored with their trophies, and the memories of Condé and Coligny will ever be fragrant. There were many resistances there, both before and since the Parisian massacre. It is sad that the present Protestants there are so far degenerate from the spirit of their ancestors. 11th. The many practices of the Hungarians resisting the encroachments of the House of Austria proved the same, and when Matthias denied the free exercise of religion unto the Protestants of Austria, they took up arms in their own defense and sent a protestation unto the states of Hungary, requiring their assistance conform to their league. And now this present war they are founded upon this plea. 12th. The Polonians have oftentimes levied war against their kings, and we are furnished by Clarke in his Mortal with a late instance of their resistance against the sovereign powers at Lesna in Poland in the year 1655. 13th. The Danes and Swedes have not been wanting for their parts in taking course with their Christians, kings of that name, whom they resisted and punished, and generally, whenever the Reformation was received, we find this principle espoused and the practice of it prosecuted. Nay, there hath been no nation in the world, but it will be found they have either resisted or killed tyrants. 14th. The most deserving and celebrated monarchs in the world have espoused the quarrel of oppressed subjects. Not only such as Tamerlane, whose observable saying is noted, when he advanced against Bajazet, I go, says he, to chastise his tyranny, and to deliver the afflicted people. And Philip and Louis of France, who assisted the barons of England against King John, and Charles the Great, who upon this ground undertook a war against the Lombards in Italy. But even Constantine the Great hath it recorded for his honor that he employed his power and force against Licinius, upon no other motive but because he banished, tortured, and destroyed those Christians in his dominions that would not abandon their religion. And Queen Elizabeth is commended for assisting the Dutch to maintain their religion by force, when they could not enjoy it by favor. And King James VI gave public aid to the Protestants in Germany and Bohemia against the Emperor, against whom also Gustavus Adolphus marched, that he might deliver the oppressed cities from the bondage that Ferdinand had brought them into. Yea, King Charles I, this man's father, pretended at least to help the Protestants in France at Rhe and Rochelle, and though he himself was avowedly resisted by the parliaments of both kingdoms, yet he was forced to declare, in his acts of oblivion and pacification, the Scots late taking up of arms against him in defense of their religion, laws, and privileges, to be no treason nor rebellion. See Apologetic Relations, section 11, page 149. And though the late Charles II condemned all the risings of the people of Scotland for defense of religion and liberty and their lives and privileges, which his own tyranny forced them into, yet he justified the present revolt of heathens and Mohammedan subjects from the young king of Bantam in Java Major in the East Indies, who, when he got the government in his hands by his father's resignation, killed his subjects and caused them to be killed without any cause, which was the reason of their revolt from him and defending the father against the son. This defensive war of these subjects was justified by the said Charles in his sending ammunition, etc., for relief. These and many more instances that might be adduced are sufficient evidences of the righteousness and reason of such resistances, when the greatest of princes have undertaken the patrociny of them.